In 2005, Milagros Muñoz decided to fulfill the American dream and buy her first home. But with the real estate prices hiking up, she got more than she bargained for.
La casa me costó mucho dinero.
It was very expensive. It was above my budget, but everything was expensive then.
She now realizes she should have never accepted into that loan, but the real estate agent she was working with made sure to do what was needed to get her approved.
Ellos no podían darme esta casa.
Now I know they shouldn't have given me this house. My salary wasn't high enough, and I was single. The real estate agent made some arrangements for me to qualify.
What they did was to change her W-2s to make it seem like her annual income was $80,000 and not the $35,000 she was making.
En mi income tax, ellos lo cambiaron la forma de...
They changed my income tax to show that I made $80,000 a year, when all I was making was $35,000. They raised my income really high so that the bank would approve my loan.
But Milagros was never told of this arrangement. Yet, there was something else she discovered first. Her annual interest rate was variable.
Ese tiempo yo estaba buscando...
At that time, I was looking for help to understand the papers I signed because there were so many. And sometimes they explain you one thing and it's really something else. But I started reading myself and realized my mortgage was going to be increased in 2 years. I got scared and tried to do something to avoid having to pay my whole salary.
And when she tried to get help about the increase on her mortgage, she found out about the altered information.
Cuando yo supo de el ingreso,
when I learned about the alteration to my salary, I complained to the bank. They sent me the results on my case and I saw so many things. They've changed all my information. That's when I understood how much they had hurt me, because it was them who acted wrong, not me. I told them the right information. I gave them all the correct papers. It wasn't that I wanted a house so desperately I was willing to do anything. I wanted to do things right. I wanted to get the right rate.
And now, Milagros finds herself in a dead-end street.
No puedo refinance.
I can't refinance because my credit is ruined. It's not my fault that this is happening to me because the bank didn't confirm my salary. If they could help me lower my payments, because I want to pay my mortgage, I want to keep my house, but I need them to give me a loan that I can pay. I need a fixed rate so that I can keep up with the payments. I would pay, but they don't want to help you like that.
Unfortunately, as her monthly payments kept increasing, Milagros started falling behind and is now in the process of foreclosure. Yet, she remains hopeful that somebody might be able to help her.
When the sheriff handed me the notice, I was astonished. My heart dropped to the floor, and I asked myself, what am I going to do now? He handed me the notice, told me to sign it, and left. Now all I can think of is that I have to fight this, and I have to get help.
Tengo que luchar y buscar ayuda.
We've now taken a closer look at the stories of 3 families, and Andrew Jacobovics, when we look at these 3 very different stories, which all are headed in the same direction, as an economist, as you're trying to unravel all this, do you look at somebody whose community price, the housing price in the area, really dropped, so they're underwater, differently from the way you look at somebody with a bad mortgage, as opposed to somebody like Mrs. Munoz in our last story, who seems to have been involved in fraud? Or does an economist look at this as, hey, it's the bottom line that really is at play here. I don't care how they got here, just where they are.
I think that you need to address each of them both the same on some level, but very differently as well. And so the economist also is compassionate. And I think that certainly in cases of fraud, there is clear illegality at play. And so one of the real challenges is that in many cases there are so many barriers to being able to gain legal help in this fraud case, right? The note holder is not aware and necessarily didn't act in bad faith, and so they have a legitimate claim on the property. Mrs. Munoz clearly acted in good faith, and in many cases the bad actor has vanished. A lot of the worst lenders have gone out of business. If you kind of look at, there are a lot of these websites out there that kind of track the implosion of the subprime lending market.
And just to explain a little more, the person that she is sending her, or had been sending her monthly payment to, may not be a person who had anything to
had
do
nothing
with,
to do,
with
right.
changing
they,
her
they,
documents.
They simply accepted the responsibility for taking her payment and sending it off either to the bank that bought the mortgage or to these investors who may be scattered all over the world who have bought rights to a small piece of her monthly payment. And so they bought, in many cases, those rights, again, in perfectly good faith. And in many cases, the ratings agencies said, all this stuff is great, smells like roses, we're going to slap a AAA rating on it, and everybody can buy it. You know, everybody's grandmother should own these things in their retirement funds. And so that's also part of the problem in terms of getting this back to this question of who's going to suffer the losses and how we get the losses to be distributed. There are many good people out there who don't realize that they're going to be hurt in all of this. And I think that's where the compassion comes in on both sides. So to the extent that we can keep her in her home, again, because in many cases, the cost of going to foreclosure is higher to the bank than to restructure the mortgage. And it's certainly in the best interest in many cases for the bank to do the modification, either by writing down the principal that is owed, because again, what they could recover if they had to sell that house in foreclosure is likely to be far lower than the stream of payments that she could afford to make, even if it's at a far reduced level. And I think that's really the crux of the issue is, again, I think his peer is absolutely right. If we can figure out some way of narrowing that spread between the 25 cents that you get at foreclosure and the 75 cents that the bank might be willing to entertain, and I think there's a role for government to kind of make that happen, either by saying, look, if you are sitting on a pool of mortgages that has a high default rate, you no longer qualify for the special tax breaks. So go ahead and modify these things because that's in the best interest of everybody involved. That's one way to do it. You figure out some way of buying these things out, either at the sort of, if there's government money going in to sort of help this process, then there needs to be some recovery for the taxpayer. And I think that there is in that upside. So if the government is going to step in and basically allow these hedge funds to step in through this public-private partnership, which is part of the TARP program potentially, to say, look, acquire what they call these toxic assets, these sort of infectious mortgages, at some reduced value, if there's public money going in there, make it part of the program rules that say, as a consequence of participation, you need to restructure the mortgages that can be restructured based on the current value of the property. We'll give you a fair interest rate. And the idea is to be able to sustain that, because the threat of walking away from a home impacts not only the people who would potentially make that decision, but it impacts the neighbors who now are suffering from another vacant, abandoned, and foreclosed property on their block.